You might have forgotten about the fact that Francois is still an MP. And not only that, he is the Shadow Defence Minister. And he's been on GB News complaining bitterly about Brexit betrayal, grandmother's footsteps, and oh my goodness, getting back closer to the EU, trying to betray our fish and making us a rule taker of the EU instead of a rule taker of Donald Trump.
Here's what is going on. There's going to be this so-called reset with the EU, and this will be formalised at a UK-EU summit in London on the 19th of May, so a little under a month from now. And I'm going to make you a prediction live on air.
Oh, risky business.
I know, and if I'm wrong, I'll come on afterwards and I'll eat humble pie. But I don't think I am. So here's what's going to happen. I saw Starmer night after night, week after week, when we had the battles over Brexit in the House of Commons, endlessly calling for a second referendum because he couldn't abide the result of the first one. And he remains a Remainer. Always will be. He's an absolute Europhile at heart. So this is what they're going to do. At the summit, they're going to announce a major defence pact with the EU. We don't know what the details are. We'll know at the time. There may be some merits in it. It might perhaps help Ukraine. We need to know the small print. While they're doing that, they will surrender on our fishing rights, and they will also take up EU rules in certain areas like veterinary science and others in a process that's known as dynamic alignment, which is a fancy phrase, but it basically means if they introduce a new rule, we amend our rules to comply with their rules. So we become a rule taker. We would automatically follow the rules of the EU, even though we're not in it anymore. And in certain circumstances, the European Court of Justice would be the final arbiter of those rules. So they will use defence at the summit as camouflage, as a smokescreen for a major surrender to the EU on fish and on the fact that we become a rule taker in certain areas of law, overseen by the European Court of Justice. And that is a step on the road to taking us back in, which is what Starmer has always wanted to do from the day he became Prime Minister. In fact, before that. That's my prediction. Let's see if I'm right.
This would be quite a U-turn. This would be one of the biggest ones, surely. He's denied always that he wants to return in any way to the European Union, has he not?
Look, I sat in Parliament night after night. I saw him conspiring with people all across the House to try and find just about any method he could think of to keep us in the EU at almost any cost. In the end, didn't work. We had a general election to settle it, to get Brexit done, and we did. We left the EU, we withdrew our MEPs from the European Parliament because we were no longer entitled to have them. He's always wanted to take us back in, but the problem is the British people decided peacefully and democratically in a referendum to leave. He'll never risk another referendum, so he's going to do it by grandmother's footsteps. He's going to do it bit by bit, and the defence announcement at the summit in May will be absolute camouflage to try and divert attention. And when people say, well, what about fish? Oh, don't worry about that. That's all just minor technical stuff. Nothing to see here. Move along. We want to talk about defence.
But isn't the gamble that Keir Starmer has taken here that people at home might not care about sanitary and phytosanitary regulation? That people at home might not care that under the Conservative government the Genetic Technologies Act was passed that allows for gene editing and all this exciting stuff that the EU puts its precautionary principles on and stops that sort of nascent technology developing. They might not care if we don't have this exciting GM future in our foods and we take the European rules. Isn't that the gamble that the Prime Minister is making?
It's the principle of it. I admit that, phytosanitary regulations might not be the talk of the pubs in Rayleigh tonight. I give you that. or in Wickford indeed, but it's the principle that we would become a rule taker.
Yeah.
That's what dynamic alignment means. It means if they move, we automatically mirror them.
And importantly, that means that if we're negotiating a trade deal with Mr. Trump,
Yeah.
well, we couldn't change our regulations on things like food because we'd have to take the EU rules. That is a big hand behind our back.
Correct.
In other negotiations.
The only reason we're even able to negotiate a trade deal with President Trump, or indeed any other country, is because we left the EU and we're no longer in the customs union. The clue is in the name. Being in a customs union means common customs. You can't do individual bespoke deals with other countries. You can only do them within the EU. And because we've left the EU, we have a Brexit freedom to negotiate those alternative deals. We've done over 75, Australia, New Zealand, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Kemi Badenoch had a lot to do with all of that. But you're right, if we automatically aligned with EU rules on things like veterinary science and food, then that might mean we couldn't do a trade deal with other countries that wanted to sell us some products in those fields.
And people may not care too much about these veterinary standards and sanitary standards and all of this. But one thing that they will care about is what appears to be a backdoor method to open borders, or could be portrayed as such. But these types of mobility schemes.
The principle is, what was the point of having a referendum? To leave the European Union, which we democratically decided to do as a country, whether Keir Starmer likes it or doesn't, he lost. So what was the point of going through all that if we're now going to sign up and become an EU rule taker again? What was the point? So there, I'm afraid, and that wouldn't just apply to Northern Ireland, by the way, that would apply across the whole of the United Kingdom.
And I suppose we talk about food in the abstract, but this could relate to things that people really care about. Animal welfare, the live export of animals, halal slaughter. All of these issues could then be governed by Brussels rather than Westminster.
Well, OK, I haven't had many constituents who said to me in the 24 years I've been an MP, I'm really worried about phytosanitary checks. But I think you find food is an issue that most of us have a view on. So if it's going to affect the food we eat, I think people will be concerned. But I come back again, at the risk of hammering the nail to split the wood, I come back again to the fact they are going to use this big defence announcement to totally smokescreen all the rest of it, and then whenever anybody asks, be it politicians or journalists, they're going to go, oh, nothing to see here, move along, oh, that's all just in the small.
It's going to get harder and harder for the Brexit mob to sell any Brexit betrayal, because every step that is taken to undo Brexit will improve life in Britain, and it'll prove that they were always telling pork pies about Brexit.
I think you should apologise.
To who?
To 70
To racists and anti-Semites?
Because you've basically tried to slur anybody who voted Leave as a bigot, and I think you should apologise.
No, I haven't. I said that's the problem.
Listen, Mark, what he said is everyone who is a racist voted Leave.
How could he know that?
Well, that of course is up for discussion.
It's a secret ballot. How can he know?
You know, for all the reasons I've
How
adduced
could you know
already,
that?
which is that the problem for nationalists generally is that they fall into the hands of what we call ethnic
Utterly
nationalists.
ridiculous.
All right, you mentioned Dominic Raab earlier, and on that we haven't got time to actually play the clip. Hang on. Let me bring in the two ladies. Hang on, Grace. There is a point that Dominic Raab said that there will be a day of reckoning if Brexit doesn't happen, and there would be a day of reckoning. The implication is if it went to a second referendum. Do you accept that there is a danger of that?
No, totally. But as we can see now,
Plea to you. You are the professional head of the armed forces. Please nip back to the department and ask them to sort their bloody selves out, because if not, Cummings is going to come down there and sort you out his own way, and you won't like it.
Okay.
We've slowly been letting out the cattle for the summer. They've passed their TB test, fortunately. Another test in 60 days because we had a positive a couple of months ago. But it's great to see them outside having fun. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and comment below. Let me know what you think. Off for another walk again.